Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I'm so delighted to be here today with author Cai Emmons. Welcome.
Thank you. It's very good to be here.
Oh, it's truly my pleasure. Thank you for having this conversation with me. A little bit about Cai Emmons. She is the author of the novels Weather Woman, His Mother's Son, and The Stylist. She teaches in the University of Oregon's creative writing program. Her newest book is Vanishing, a collection of short stories. And I know you have that sitting right next to you. Do you mind showing us that beautiful book? Oh, look at that. So Vanishing, and that is what we're going to talk about today. So Kai, please tell me all about Vanishing.
Well, it's my first collection of short stories, and I don't normally consider myself a short story writer. I'm usually a novelist. But a little while back, of course, over the years, when you've been to an MFA program and when you just write some short stories. So I had a few lying around. Some had been published, some hadn't. And I looked at them and saw among a few of them a kind of a connecting thread. And I put them together and I submitted them to a competition. And I was really gobsmacked when it won and it came with publication.
Congratulations.
I don't know. I mean, you know the numbers that submit, and I really didn't expect it, but I thought it was worth a try. And now I feel really good about it because it feels as if it provides such closure for these stories. And, now they're in a place together, speaking to each other in some way. And I'm very thrilled. By the way, the competition was Leapfrog Press, and I found them to be wonderful to work with.
Oh, fantastic. Well, three cheers for Leapfrog Press, and thank you for finding Vanishing and publishing it so that we can all enjoy it. So you spoke about these stories having kind of a connecting thread. Tell me more about that. How do these stories play together?
Okay, well, they're all stories with female protagonists, and all of the women in these stories are having difficulty finding traction in their lives. It's as if the rug has been pulled out from under them in some way or other. And to some degree, they feel unseen. I would say maybe invisible in certain cases. And so that's really the connecting thread. It's women feeling unseen or sidelined. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And hence the title, Vanishing. I imagine there's some play there.
I made a book trailer for the, I don't know if I've sent this to you, but you should have it because the filmmaker who did it, it's only a little over a minute. And he does this wonderful thing with these characters kind of literally disappearing.
I have seen the book trailer, and we'll make sure viewers, please, we'll put the link in the description and in the chat. So please do make sure to check out the book trailer too for Vanishing. Yeah, so interesting. And I do feel like this question of being seen, especially for women, is a really big one, and especially as we try to take up a little bit more space and to be seen more, there is a lot of blowback that happens there. I feel like I've read statistics about when women speak more in meetings, when you ask the men, like, how much did those women speak? They're like, oh my gosh, they spoke for 75% of the time. They really took up a lot of space in that meeting. And then, like, if you look back, it's like the women spoke for like 40% of the time. And so that difference in feeling has women learned to take up space. Yeah.
And some of these women are kind of surprised to have this happen. I mean, they felt like they were holding their own perfectly well. And then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, no. So, anyway.
Fascinating.
I didn't know, or here's another thing. I didn't know that this was an ongoing kind of theme that I'd been thinking about for over a period of 20 years, actually, because the first story in this collection was written when I was in graduate school 20 years ago. And the most recent one, I mean, the one of them is much more recent, but obviously this idea has been threaded through, has been on my mind for many years.
Absolutely, for literally decades. Yeah. And certainly those questions will continue to be relevant as we move into the future too. So in your previous works, they were novels, and this is a collection of short stories. So can you tell me a little bit about what lessons you may have learned from writing those novels, or perhaps what lessons you learned from the stories, since some of these stories may have come before your novels?
That's a challenging question to answer, because the stories were kind of written in between novels, or in one case before I'd written any novels. I think the way they inform each other is, I'm not sure if I can answer that, but I can say that I feel short stories and novels require different things of me. A novel really does require an attention to plotting, an attention to structure, in the way that a short story does not. You know, a short story, you can start writing it with kind of only a half-baked idea and get to the end of it and then go back and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it fairly easily. With a novel, and this has happened to me, you can write, if you start that way, you may easily write hundreds of pages that you will have to scrap. You really need to have some sense of where you're going, some sense of structure. And I'm not talking about a person who writes a novel as from an outline, and I never do that, but I do have some kind of architectural sense. And with the stories, that comes belatedly after the fact.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And it's interesting that you said that some of these short stories came in between the writing of the novels. I almost wonder if that was sort of like your creative process saying, oh, I'm going to shake structure for just a second and just play in this short form, that there's a little bit of space that doesn't require as much.
A little bit, or there was some particular moment in time. I think when the moment is more salient than something that is ongoing, then it becomes a short story. And in one case, one of the stories, Fat, it's actually was part of a novel that I ended up sidelining. So that became, you know, kind of, there were a lot of things in that novel that I wanted to save. And so I thought, well, why not try to make a short story here?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. Fantastic. Yes, I think Elizabeth Gilbert has said nothing is wasted, right? And so I'm so glad that that novel at least got a little bit of life with this short story that is now part of Vanishing.
Well, I think that's what the publication of this book has said to me. Don't ever, you know, toss anything forever, because it may be usable in some form or other. And of course, there's no need to toss anything because we have it forever on our computers.
I know, for better or for worse. Sometimes it's good that those things stay buried away. Indeed.
Please don't go into my computer.
Indeed.
Actually, I write things longhand first, so please don't go into my longhand pads of paper. And
oh, that's fascinating. What do you find about writing longhand that helps you in that first draft process?
Well, I do it a great deal. I should actually show you one of my pads or my sheets of paper. There's a lot of writing in the margins, asterisks, jotting down an idea that will come a little further along, but I'm not ready to write it out yet. And it's something that really a computer program can't possibly do. It's way too, well, I want to say messy, but it's keeping track of multiple ideas at the same time and trying to kind of figure out how they'll play out. I love it. And I think, you know, they say the human brain operates differently when you write longhand than when you write on the computer. A lot of times people say if you take notes longhand, you'll retain them better than if you write them on the computer. And so I think it's a brain thing, and I've trained my brain to do that. So I can't shift it now. I mean, it quickly gets onto the computer, of course, you know, when I type it up, and then it's editing back and forth, but it always begins longhand.
Oh, fantastic. And I imagine that typing then almost becomes a revision pass too, right? Like
it does. You know, there's a little bit of, I try to prevent myself from doing too much revision. And in part because it's kind of painful to type up something that is a rough draft, you know. But a former student of mine just wrote an entire novel longhand without typing up any of it along the way. And he's now spending months typing. And I feel, I mean, I know how painful that is. It's hard.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Well, it'll be interesting to see the product, and very fascinating to hear that process for you about getting it down longhand and the process of getting it into the computer and how it revises from there. That's fantastic. Yeah. So speaking of revision, we are all having our lives revised in this COVID-19 pandemic that we are in. We are taping this on March 28th, 2020, moment in time that we are, and we were supposed to have met in person because we're both both living in the Pacific Northwest, but we're over Zoom. So I would just love to take a minute and just kind of check in about how you're doing with this COVID-19 pandemic, and like what narratives maybe you're turning to in this time of crisis, or what comfort fiction maybe is offering you right now, either the writing of it or the reading of it.
One thing I think the effect of this pandemic has had on all of us is that we're all stopping, calming down. We're not, racing ahead at such breakneck speed. And it's made for a lot of rumination and thought about what our lives mean and where they're going and what we want to keep doing or not keep doing if this ever ends. Fingers crossed. And for a writer, it has really deepened that process for me. I mean, writers are always sort of in that zone, of thinking about things and pondering their meaning. But for one thing, the pandemic has given me lots more time to write. So much in my schedule has fallen away that I pretty much, have most of the day to write if I want. And I do most of the time. And then reading, of course, is the other thing that I do a lot of. And I find that, I guess my reading habits in general have changed, not just from the pandemic, but I just feel like I have no patience for reading something that does not speak to me. So I'll read maybe a quarter of a book, and if it's not speaking to me, I'll lay it aside without any obligation that I might have felt in the past to complete it. I hate to admit, I know writers don't like to hear that, but I accept that people may do that with my books as well. If it doesn't speak to you, what's the point? Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've done a little bit differently during the pandemic is I'm reading more nonfiction. I had a trip planned to Ireland that had to scrap, but I started reading this wonderful book called Say Nothing, about the troubles in Northern Ireland in the 60s and 70s, 1960s and 1970s. And it's terrific. It's written by a New Yorker writer, and it's beautifully written. And I've been reading Bill McKibben's new book, Falter. And these speak to me as I'm thinking about, where the world is going and what we're going to, do with our political situation, as well as the pandemic. That doesn't mean that I've forsaken fiction at all. Let's see, I recently read The Topeka School by Ben Lerner, and I just adored it. I mean, what a head to occupy for a while, a brain. I love being in his brain. So I'm not sure, except for that addition of more nonfiction, I would have to say that's the biggest change for me.
Yeah, and I think especially in this time of crisis, like self-care is always really important, but I think it's especially important now, because this has a very psychic weight to it, even though we're having to, we're slowing down and we're spending more time at home and more time with our families, but it's with this burden of, oh my gosh, what's going to happen in this burden of uncertainty. So in a sense, a book is actually a really grateful place because, okay, I know that I'm taken care of. I know that this has got a beginning, middle, and end, and there's some safety in that book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. So
the other thing I will say is that I've always loved immersive stories. I mean, stories that really suck me in, keep me there. It doesn't matter what they're about. And I feel like those kinds of stories, the ones that they may be thought-provoking, but whatever they are, they're delivering emotionally in some way. Those are particularly comforting at a time like this. Even something like Hilary Mantel's books. I think she's a very immersive writer. Jennifer Egan's most recent book, Manhattan Beach, I found extremely immersive. Hana Yaganahara, that was a bleak book, but A Little Life. Oh my gosh, talk about total immersion. I couldn't let that book out of my sight for when I was reading it. Yeah.
Oh, what a recommendation. And that is great. And so now we have a list of places to go to be immersed if we need to take a break. So thank you. Thank you for those reading suggestions. And thank you so much for writing Vanishing. As another book to add to that list, please do show us that beautiful book one more time.
Here we go.
Yeah, so must readers, please do check out Cai Emmons' Vanishing. And Cai, thank you so very much for taking the time to speak with me, and be well and stay safe.
You're quite welcome. You too, Erin. I really enjoyed it.